Now, even the mainstream media is admitting that we'll likely have a recession in 2023.
A lot of the indicators now are really suggesting that a recession is likely this year.
But Wall Street and repo market legend Zoltan Pozsar says this recession is going to be different.
The second thing that's going to make this recession or the risk of recession different from the past is that
I'm going to reveal why he's saying this, and at the end of the video, I'm going to let you know whether or not I agree. We'll be doing this in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's go right over a commodity super cycle. What is this? Why does it matter? Go all the way back to 1899. And this chart goes to 2016, but I've extended it out to today's date, 2023. On the left, we go from 0 up to 0.75, 75%, and from 0 down to a negative 75%. So what this is it's an adjusted commodity price. I believe it's a 5 or 10-year average, so they kind of smooth it out. But it's not the actual prices themselves. It's simply a reflection of where they are relative to trend. Okay, so let's think about this. If the trend is going up like this, at this angle, but yet prices are going up like that, well, that's going to be green because it's above trend. But let's say trend is down like this, or let's say trend is even up, but the actual prices are going down, well, that's going to be below trend, therefore blue. And this allows us to see these super cycles and how they've played out over the last, call it 100, 125 years. So in 1904, we peak out at commodity prices, and then we go down, as you'd imagine, bottom out in 1933 during the Great Depression. And then we go up to 1947. I'd like to remind you, in 1947, the CPI in the United States was over 19%. So it's not surprising that commodity prices were extremely high. We go down into another trough, if you will, 1961, and then Volcker comes in and smashes inflation by jacking interest rates up to 19, 20% at the time. As you can imagine, commodity prices very low. And then we bottom out again in 1996. And by the way, that's when Jim Rogers started talking about the next commodity super cycle. He actually wrote a book about it called Hot Commodities in 2002 or 2003. But back to the whiteboard, you guys know what happened in GFC? The exact same thing. So what have commodity prices done recently? Well, if you just look at this chart, they started to come down because this chart only goes to 2016. Let's fast forward to the cerveza sickness and remember that oil got to negative $38 a barrel. Negative $38 a barrel. So it's pretty safe to say that was most likely a bottom in the next commodity super cycle. So we have to understand these dynamics to understand why Zoltan is saying this recession is going to be different. So the next question becomes, okay, George, I get it. We have these cycles that go up and down and up and down, but my gosh, they seem very predictable. Why is that? Editor, let's cut straight to the internet. So now let me go ahead and reveal the answer to the main question. Why are commodity prices cyclical? Commodity prices go through extended periods during which prices are well above or below long-term price trends, just like we went over the whiteboard. There are 2 types of swings in commodity prices, upswings, downswings. Many economists believe that the upswing phase in super cycles result from a lag between unexpected, persistent, and positive trends to support commodity demand with slow-moving supply. That's pretty much the main takeaway. So you have demand that can go up or down very quickly, but supply takes years, if not decades, to come online. And then once more supply comes online, usually that's when demand is decreasing because of the typical business cycle. And this is why commodity prices constantly way overshoot and way undershoot the historic trend. Step number 2. So the main reason Zoltan Pozsar thinks this recession will be different is because he thinks this recession we will continue to have extremely high rates of consumer price inflation. Let's go right back to the chart and think this through. So the supply side of the equation is something we need to focus on. You've got demand and you've got supply. And Zoltan points out in his recent interview, the cure for high prices usually is high prices. So going back to the 1970s, let's say, as you saw prices go up and up and up, this incentivizes two things. Demand to go down because people want to use less because it's a higher price, and it incentivizes the suppliers to produce more because they're making windfall profits. So demand comes down, supply goes up, plus Paul Volcker jacks rates to 20%, and that's when those commodity prices and prices more broadly come down quick. And we saw a similar dynamic play out in the early 2000s then with the GFC. And I'd like to remind everyone, in Q1 or Q2 of 2009, inflation was actually negative. In other words, we had outright deflation. But Zoltan points out in this most recent upswing in prices, we haven't had that same type of supply come online. Why? Because we haven't had the investment. Over the last decade plus, we've had this movement towards ESG, to where now all of these governments are saying that they're never going to use fossil fuels again, or at least they set some date in the future, like 2030 or 2040, where none of us are going to be driving gas cars. Okay, well, that's fine. Just put yourself in the position of an oil producer. If you see the political winds shifting in that direction, are you going to be incentivized to invest billions and billions of dollars right now on oil production that won't come online for 10 or 15 years? Absolutely not. The only thing you're going to do is buy your shares back, and that's exactly what we've seen. To hear Zoltan explain this in his own words, editor, let's cut right to the interview.
This price signal that used to exist in the past, where the response to high prices was more production and ultimately the result of that was lower prices, that feedback loop today is broken.
So the cure for high prices may no longer be high prices. And if this is true, it will create a recession that is highly inflationary. Why? Because those commodity prices, especially energy, is an input to every single thing you buy. And let me be very clear. I see things a little bit different, and we're going to get into my view in step number 3. But right now, I'm explaining Zoltan's position and his framework for how he comes to the conclusion that this recession is going to be much, much different. But it's not just the supply side dynamics, it's also the fact that we've got some serious geopolitical situations right now. Everyone knows that since Russia invaded Ukraine, we have no longer had what they call a peace dividend. And looking out over the next 3 to 5 years, this situation, well, let's call it Russia, China, India, all those BRIC countries, and the West is likely going to become more volatile. The more volatile it becomes, the more you have this bifurcation in the global economy, and that means higher prices. Then Zoltan points out that we have all these emerging markets in Africa, Asia, South America, that in aggregate total are similar to what we saw with China in the early 2000s. First and foremost, he believes that they're going to implement protectionist policies. But one thing I would add is something I see right here in Colombia every single day. So if we have a recession, you would assume that the demand side would fall dramatically. But this would happen at the same time when all these emerging markets are starting to go through this economic cycle. Now, this economic cycle happens very slowly, but it's definitely going to impact whether we see lower or higher prices moving forward. Let me explain. And it's hard for people in the United States and in the West to really get their head around this because they've been born and raised, for that matter, in a developed economy. But here in Colombia and in other areas that have, let's say, 2-3 billion people, people start off riding bicycles. And then the economy starts to grow, starts to become better and better and better, and the economic position of each individual starts to improve, or at least in aggregate total. They go from riding bicycles to riding motorcycles. Then the same thing happens over 5 years, maybe a decade. Then they're able to afford their first little compact car. And then they get a better job. And then the wife is working as well, let's say. And then they're able to go from a little compact car to maybe a bigger size car, like a SUV that all the Americans like to drive. This is how the free market works if people are allowed to pursue their own self-interest and you have private property. Again, something we're seeing more and more in the emerging markets. And it makes a lot of sense because people are always going to want a better life for themselves and their kids. So they're going to try to climb that socioeconomic ladder. And I just used the example of transportation, but you could do the exact same thing with food, where they go from eating rice to eating more and more sugar and more protein. So a lot of you right now are probably scratching your head and say, yeah, George, I get that, but what's your point? Because this requires more and more energy and more commodities. So if demand for commodities goes up, while at the same time, demand for commodities is going down in the West on net balance, it might level out while the supply side is going down. And that goes right back to Zoltan's thesis, where in this recession, we might not see commodity prices go down. We may see them continue to go straight up. Step number 3, why I think Zoltan Pozsar is wrong. You see, I believe the central planners, the authoritarians, the mainstream media are always wrong. And the marketplace is almost always correct. So let's think about this for a moment. Remember back in 2020 or 2021, that's when the central planners at the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, was saying that, oh, this inflation stuff, we've got nothing to worry about. This is only transitory. Editor, let's cut to the clip.
The concept of transitory is really this. The process of inflation will stop.
And then when the yield curve inverted, which is predicted pretty much every single recession going all the way back to 1950, the central planners came out and said, oh, no, there's not going to be a recession at all. We're going to bring down the rate of inflation and unemployment is going to remain low and the economy is going to continue to skyrocket. The economy's on fire. Look at the unemployment rate. We've got nothing to worry about. There is no recession in sight. In fact, Janet Yellen, a few years ago, said that we would never see another economic crisis in our lifetimes.
Would I say there will never, ever be another financial crisis? Probably that would be going too far, but I do think we're much safer, and I hope that it will not be in our lifetimes, and I don't believe it will be.
But now, of course, they can no longer deny what is painfully obvious and what the marketplace has been predicting for, let's say, the last year or year and a half. So they'll admit we might have an economic slowdown. Maybe we'll have a recession, but it's definitely going to be a soft landing.
We think that a soft landing is still possible.
So nothing to worry about, nothing to see here. And whatever you do, make sure you ignore those stupid fear mongers and tinfoil hatters that you see on those podcasts and on YouTube. But we'll take their advice. We'll ignore those crazies that you see on YouTube. And we'll just go right to the marketplace and see what the data is telling us. Or maybe more importantly, where people are actually placing their bets. And not just people. This is the smart money. What am I referring to specifically? This is the euro-dollar futures curve. and we go back to September 22, but this is projecting out to December of 2026. On the left, we go from 2.5% up to 5.5%. So what this does is it's basically like a proxy for what the marketplace thinks the Federal Reserve is going to do in the future. Let's start by looking at this red line. So this was what the marketplace was predicting the Fed would do in June of 2022. So they predicted that the Fed is going to raise rates, but then they were going to lower them. They're going to lower them a little bit. So this would be something that you would see if we were to have a soft landing. And I think in order to have Zoltan's view that commodity prices are not going to go down, they're going to continue to go straight up, you would also have to believe that this recession is going to be very mild. But let's look and see how this curve has changed. We'll fast forward to March of 2023. Now, on the main chart that the editor is showing you, this line is orange. I didn't have an orange pen. So we'll just have to use the green and just pretend that's orange. So back in March, only a month ago or so, it was predicting the Fed would get way up here to maybe 5.75. But I'd like to point out that this was prior to Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and Credit Suisse basically going bust. But even back then, it predicted that the Fed would drop rates very quickly and very significantly. Okay, well, where are we today or closer today? This is as of April 4th, 2023, this black line. Look at how much it's changed. Now it's predicting that the Fed might get up to 5.25, something like that. But what's most important is how the marketplace is betting that the Fed will not just drop rates, but they will drop rates massively. Another simple way to interpret this chart is the steeper the curve goes, the worse the recession is likely to be. And look at the trend. The trend is the curve is getting steeper and steeper and steeper. So you have to sit back for a moment and ask yourself, what would cause Jerome Powell, who wants to be remembered as Paul Volcker, not Arthur Burns, to actually lower rates dramatically in 2023? Whereas right now, he's talking this hawkish, we're going to fight inflation, we're going to be tough, we're going to keep raising rates, maybe we might pause. No, Jerome Powell. The market isn't saying that you're going to pause. The market is saying you are going to pivot. And you're going to pivot fast, and you're going to pivot hard. Those rates are going to plummet. So again, what would prompt Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve to do what the market is predicting? A soft landing or a hard landing? Obviously, the answer is a hard landing. And in my opinion, it might not just be a recession. It could be a global economic recession, another crisis, or black swan event. So as far as Zoltan's overall analysis, I totally agree. Makes a lot of sense. Tough to argue with facts. But when it comes to his conclusion, that's where I disagree. And my main point of contention is the marketplace is telling us that we are going to have a significant recession, if not economic depression. And if we do, although the supply side, like we were saying in step 1 and 2, is definitely constrained with commodities and many other things, I think the demand side is going to come down so much that it's going to overwhelm the supply constraints that Zoltan points out very, very well. But if we zoom out a little and have a different time horizon, I'm definitely in the Zoltan Pozsar camp, where I believe that we have entered a long-term commodity supercycle that won't end until 2030 or maybe even 2035. So right about now, you're probably saying to yourself, okay, George, I get the difference between you and Zoltan, maybe just a little bit different time horizons, but overall, you see things very, very similarly. I understand there's a recession coming our way. I understand that the government is breathing down our neck and taking away our freedom, our liberty, our privacy, but what do I do about it? Well, I've actually got some answers for you. I got a solution for you. You can check out rebelcapitalistlive.com. This is the conference that I have coming up May 12th through the 14th in Orlando, where I've got speakers like Peter Schiff, Mike Maloney, Lynn Alden, Chris McIntosh, Brent Johnson, Jeff Snyder, the Eurodollar master himself, and many, many more. They're all going to be there. You can gain their insights and you can listen to them speak. You can meet them. You can have a beer with them, rub elbows, ask them your specific question directly. But even more importantly, you can network with your fellow rebel capitalists, people that have a very similar worldview, that value freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism. In today's day and age of huge financial bubbles, geopolitical tensions, and an Orwellian nanny state, you've got to have an edge. And the best way to start is by going to Rebel Capitalist Live. I'll look forward to seeing you in Orlando, May 12th through the 14th.